Welcome to Lead for Good, a podcast for nonprofit leaders of all titles and all experience levels. This is a show where the audience will meet and get to know top nonprofit leaders. Together, we will take a deep dive into nonprofit leadership, endeavoring to uncover and unpack the most important characteristics, traits, strategies, and actions of successful nonprofit leaders. Through this journey together, we desire to help you, the nonprofit leader, grow your knowledge and capabilities to lead for good. We want you to achieve your full potential as leaders in the sector. So, welcome to the conversation. We're glad you joined us today. Without further delay, let's join our host, Chris Looney, as he interviews yet another extraordinary leader who is truly leading for good. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to Lead for Good, a show for nonprofit leaders of all titles and experience levels. My name is Chris Looney, and I have the good fortune to be your host for this deep dive into nonprofit leadership. Our show endeavors to cover the most important nonprofit leadership topics with the goal of helping the audience reach their full philanthropic potential and full potential as nonprofit leaders. Today, we welcome Robert Santana, who is a social entrepreneur, a CEO, a board advisor, keynote speaker, leadership consultant, and self-proclaimed disruptor for good, a title I love. I've known Robert for many years and have seen the Boys and Girls Clubs of Central Orange County, the organization he leads, grow into a powerhouse of good. And I give so much credit for the organization's success to Robert's leadership and the team that he's built there. The audience is in for such a treat with this interview as we dig into Robert's leadership journey and explore the ways he gets stakeholders future ready. And I just love this concept of future ready and excited to dig deep into it. So, welcome to the show, Robert. Thank you for joining us.
Chris, thank you so much. I'm humbled, honored to join you today, and appreciate the time together for us to talk about the great work that we do here in our community.
Yeah, it's wonderful and excited to learn and grow, as is our audience. So let's dig in. Let's start with your leadership origin story. Can you tell us a little bit about how you became the leader you are today?
You know that um, e- e- everyone has their origin story, and I think everyone's start has a huge impact on the pace that they set and the focus and the values that they carry. And so for me, my journey at the Boys and Girls Club started 20 years ago this year as a volunteer. I thought I was going to go to the Boys and Girls Club for 2 or 3 weeks and mentor some kids. I had just finished a career in law enforcement. I had just finished my service in the Air Force,
Wow.
and decided to pursue a career in education. I had spent, the earlier years of my adult life going into law enforcement, and I have a couple degrees in justice administration and law enforcement, and I don't know if you're familiar with the DARE program, but I was a DARE officer, and I would
Oh,
go into these
yeah.
schools and meet with the kids, and it was just one of those moments in life that you have kind of where you kind of think about where you're going next. And I made this decision. I was 25, that I wanted to change directions. I wanted to work with young people. And so went back to school to earn a degree in child development and a teaching credential. And it's through that experience that I needed to do some field service hours. It was during the summer months, so schools were out of session. So just by chance, someone connected me to the Boys and Girls Club in Santa Ana for my field service. And so
Oh
I
my
walked
gosh.
in, got to meet these kids. I'm a product of Santa Ana, so meeting kids that grew up in the same neighborhood as I did. And little did I know then that it would change my life. And looking back, it feels like everything fell in place exactly the way that was supposed to. But in the moment, you don't know what's ahead.
Of course.
But finding this path was an opportunity for me to bring my background and my experience and my education in law enforcement, because we know what happens when we don't prepare young people, when we don't build community. I have this, passion and education and child development, really understanding the best practices of what kids and families need. And then I've always been an entrepreneur. I've always had an entrepreneurial mindset. I started my first business when I was in high school. I had a mobile detailing business. I had employees working for me while I was in high school. So I've always had this DNA of an entrepreneur. So it just so happens that I found this unique kind of niche where I get to be an entrepreneur for an organization that has a tremendous mission and does incredible work. And for the last 20 years, I've been on this journey where um, I I bring the skill set and the energy and the culture of an entrepreneur into a nonprofit, and it has helped us,
Right.
grow and innovate and just challenge the status quo, and it's just been
100%.
an exciting ride so
Yeah.
far.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Being an entrepreneurial leader in the nonprofit space kind of goes against the grain of a lot of traditional roles or typecasts. So it feels like you're a maverick in some ways, But I think more leaders need to be that entrepreneurial leader. Don't you agree?
I agree completely. I will say there's certainly been a lot of shifts in the last 10 years where I think the philanthropic community is encouraging more
Mm.
thought leadership and just a different type of nonprofit leader. I also feel like there's just been new folks that have entered this career field that bring an entrepreneurial spirit where, my first couple of years as a CEO, I certainly felt a lot of resistance. I certainly felt kind of alone in the way that I was thinking. I felt like I didn't fit into some of these rooms, where I
Right.
was surrounded by other leaders, and I didn't know any better. I didn't come to the table with a background in nonprofit, leadership. And so I will say I don't feel alone anymore. I'm surrounded by incredible leaders here locally, nationally. I think we have found each other. I think the ability to network and connect with other leaders. I certainly have a wide network of CEO leaders that are entrepreneurial, are very thoughtful, think about the future, and so I'm seeing it less and less an issue. And I see the great kind of result. We're seeing a stronger nonprofit community. I think we're seeing the philanthropic support is supporting organizations that are more forward thinking in that way.
Yeah, wonderful. Ah, that's so important. Now, you didn't come in as the CEO immediately, did you?
That's correct. So I started as a volunteer. My trajectory was pretty quick.
Rapid?
So I joined as a volunteer. Like 2 weeks, 3 weeks after I started as a volunteer, I was offered a job, and so I ended up joining staff as the director of operations.
Okay,
And
director of
so
ops.
my first job was as director of ops, and I spent about a year and a half restructuring kind of the Boys and Girls Club. Replacing things like the pool tables and the ping pong, the foosball with some technology and some robotics. Really thinking
Wow.
about the structure of what happens in a Boys and Girls Club. So those first, year and a half as director of ops, I was really starting to beta test change, right? And like any change management process, you kind of have to start, changing culture and process. And so for that first year and a half, I was really internally focused around the disruption that was happening in our Boys and Girls Club. And then about a year and a half into my journey, I became the CEO of the Boys and Girls Club, and you know that has a huge impact that has driven my journey. I was 28 years old when the board of directors appointed me as CEO, and at the time, I felt confident that I could do the job. But in hindsight, I didn't know what I didn't know. But
Hmm.
I remember the feeling that I had at the time when this board, at that time the Boys and Girls Club was 50 years old, and I felt like they made a huge decision in trusting me,
Right.
and part of it could be the imposter syndrome, right? Growing up in Santa Ana, being the first, first generation college student, never would I have thought as a kid that I would be running a company or leading a team. So part of it's the imposter syndrome in you of like, oh my gosh, they just trusted me with this, and I've never run something this big as a CEO.
Right.
Um, and I remember thinking very clearly, and it has a huge impact with me to this day. I remember thinking there are two types of people that I'm going to interact with. There's people that want you to succeed. They're in your corner. They got your back. They trust you, and they're invested in you.
Right.
And then there's people that they may not be that level of of support, right? They don't want you to succeed, or they question why, especially me as a disruptor.
Mhm.
I got some flack around
You
why are you
are.
getting rid of pool tables in the Boys and Girls Clubs. It's been a part of our history, and why are you changing something that has worked for several decades? And so I got pushback, and I remember thinking very clearly, I can either try to focus my energy trying to prove those people wrong, or I can look at the people that have invested in me and trust me, and I can focus my energy to prove them right. And so I remember thinking very clearly, I need to prove to this board that they made the right decision by appointing me. And every year since then, Chris, I've been successful. I have a great reputation. I have a great relationship with my board. But every year, I come to my job feeling like I need to continue to prove every single day that I deserve to
Yeah.
be here and to deserve to lead this organization. So it's been, I think, one of the driving forces for me to
Yeah.
continue that journey of innovation and growth, expansion, and just really kind of coming, to the table every single day. There's a quote, I don't know if you could see it behind me, but success is never owned, it's rented, and rent is due every single day. And so that's
Oh, nice.
hustle, right? And so I think
Good.
for us, it's been one of our main ingredients for success is just really coming, every day with that energy and that focus.
That's great. Well, it sounds like a lot of grit and resilience and fight, uh, proving yourself, doing right by other people, doing, good for the community. It's very selfless. It wasn't sort of, I never once heard you say, I needed to do this for myself. It was about, um, me achieving certain things. It was about helping the people that put the trust in you show that they made the right decision and doing right for the community that you obviously love and grew up in, right? So
Yeah.
that's just great. I imagine that you didn't do this alone. You had a lot of support over the years, over the decades. Who were some of the important mentors to you, or coaches, or whoever, and how did they influence you?
Yeah, I mean, we're a mentor organization from every aspect of it's our culture. It's literally our mission statement is to ensure that every young person has a mentor and a
Wow.
champion in life. And so we can't be a mentor organization to the community if we're not a mentor organization within our team. So I what I've learned through this mission um, is especially having met so many successful people in my lifetime, whether it's donors or staff members or the chief of police, elected officials. I study leadership. That's my passion is learning about leadership and making sure that we have the right culture in this organization. But the one thing that I've learned about successful people is that there's no one college that successful people all went to.
Right.
There's no zip code that like produces all the leaders that we see, successful leaders. Um, it doesn't really matter where you start. I mean, some people came from humble beginnings, some people came from means, and so what I've learned is it. There's all these different variables. The one consistent thing that I've noticed about successful people is that they have benefited from the generosity of mentorship,
Oh,
right?
wow.
They have had people in their life that have supported them, encouraged them. They were there to help them when they struggled or when they stumbled. Successful people have had mentors in their life, and what I've learned in addition to that is that even in professional life, the most successful CEOs and leaders that I know still have access to mentors, and whether that's a peer group or someone that they kind of aspire to be.
Yeah.
And so the power of mentorship isn't just affecting young people; it's something that I think truly affects you throughout your life, and you build these connections. So I've been extremely fortunate. Um, I think because I look for it is, I mentor people and I receive mentorship, right? And so I can think about the people in the Air Force that I served with that had a huge impact on my core values
Nice.
and kind of who I choose to be.
Mhm.
I often say that leadership is a choice. I choose to be a leader. It's something that I consciously do. Just like I choose to be an optimist, right? It's, people know me
Right.
very well, and I'm usually pretty positive, and I can see opportunities, and I look at the world in a very positive way, even when times are tough.
Right.
But that's a choice. I choose to think about things that way. But in the Air Force, I had several folks that were, that's where I think I learned a lot about being selfless. Obviously serving your country is something that is a decision that you make, that you're putting yourself in a position in some respects in harm's way in the defense of our country, and to defend the values and the safety of our country. And then going right into Boys and Girls Club, being surrounded by professionals, young kids. I've been very lucky to have strong board members the entire
Mhm.
time that I've been here, that I look up to. I care about personally. Some of them have been with me the entire 20-year span that I've been here,
Wow.
and I consider them to be an extension of my family.
Right.
And so, as you learn from different mentors, they contribute different things. So I've had board members that have led large public companies, and I get to pick their brain and learn from their experience.
Right.
Um, I have philanthropists who, sometimes are not on the list of the wealthiest people in our county, but
Sure.
are the most generous that I will have ever met in my life, generous with their time and their resources. And I think all these interactions have contributed to the focus that we have, and that I have as a leader, to do good work, to challenge the status quo. I've been very fortunate to be able to have a board that I can go to and say, I kind of have a crazy idea. What if we do this and this? And
Right.
they don't shoo me out of the room, and they say, how do we make that happen? And
Yeah.
so I'm just very lucky. But my board members, my executive team is someone that I'm just very lucky to have, because the bandwidth that we have is only because of the incredible leadership that we have in our organization and the culture that we've developed.
Yeah. It hit me a couple of different ways in your conversation about mentors. One, that you have mentors that help you develop your values. Which is amazing, because we think of mentors as being help professional guides in a sense, right? So clearly you have mentors that help you develop as a leader,
Yeah,
um, a business practitioner, if you will, right? But then you have these mentors that really help you understand what's
yeah,
important to you as a person, and that these mentors come in all different shapes and sizes. They
yeah,
they don't have to be older generation, they can
yeah,
be younger, they can be staff members, they can be board members, they can be donors, they can be clients, they can be kids, right?
yeah.
They can be kids, which is amazing, that you get to experience all of these wonderful kids who can shape who you are as a person as well.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned leadership is a choice. You mentioned the fact that you are a student of leadership. Um, in addition to the quote that you shared, which is so good as a philosophy around success and leadership, and leadership being a choice, are there other elements of this leadership philosophy you have that you'd want to share?
Yeah, I think as the roles that we have, right, where you lead a team, eventually your team starts to figure out what your pace is, right? Like, what would Robert say? What would Robert do? And that becomes essentially your culture in your organization. Years ago, I did like a small sabbatical and visited with leaders and just kind of like
Mm.
interviewed them. And I was trying to, at the time, I was trying to uh, kind of dissect leadership, right? I wrote this white paper that I ended up calling Decoding Leadership.
Nice.
And it was kind of a roll up of the experience that I had over 45 days, where every day I was meeting with a different person and just kind
Mm.
of asking for their thoughts and their journey, and learning from that. And I was kind of on this walkabout trying to like figure out what is the common thread with all these folks. And what I learned was like there was very little common thread. They all had different styles. They had a different, starting point, different set of experiences, but they were all very entrepreneurial in their decision making, right? And
Yeah.
and I guess I should define that. So like entrepreneurial mindset, or an entrepreneur is typically like a business owner, right? Like you own the business, you're the entrepreneur. And I've really expanded kind of that definition to be
Yeah.
someone that sees what other folks might consider a challenge, and maybe a reason to stop. And an entrepreneur doesn't stop, right? You see an obstacle and it's, how do I go over it, around it, or through it, right? And that kind
Yeah.
of goes back to my training in the Air Force, where the mission is the mission, right? The United States military doesn't stop, or give up on something. There's constant challenge that's presented, and
Right.
during my service, I really learned the value of, we're taking that hill. We're going to accomplish the mission, no matter what, no matter what comes through, our ways. You will commit to that, and I think that has followed me kind of through these years. But the things that you say, the things that you do in front of your team become the culture. So when tough times happen, if you're the leader that takes the shortcut, or gives up on something, or you make it okay for your team to take steps back, then
Right.
that becomes what your culture becomes, right? And so we say often, culture is either reactive or proactive, and so you're either going to build it out, or it's going to become reactive just by default. And so you think about like the pandemic, and the '08 financial crisis and things like that. When there's something that is like that significant, or even like the fires in the LA kind of area, most recently, this is when you see, it's during crisis, you see who steps up, right? And it's not only the right thing to do, but it also sets the culture for your organization, that when tough times happen, yes, it's scary. We may not have all the answers. I can almost certainly tell you it's going to cost more. Like there's things that are going to come up.
Right.
But if we're the organization that steps up when times are tough, or when the community needs us most, that becomes your culture. So I think part of, you know as a philosophy, is just having the courage, to be uncomfortable,
Hmm.
because a lot of the things that we do, they don't come from a place of what's easy,
Right.
or what's, kind of the shortest route. A lot of what we have done is hard work, and kind of, bring it to this concept around being a futurist CEO. It's like, it's being able to anticipate and forecast where things are going, and then building a plan that drives you to that. So, I don't know that there's one philosophy, as much as building a culture is you know being authentic and bringing it, because you can say all the right things, but if your team doesn't see you do it,
Right.
then that's not your culture. So, how we react to tough times, Obviously, me being kind of steadfast during times of crisis is something that sets the tone. But a leader is really setting the velocity of the organization. It's the speed and the direction of where you're going, and that's that tone kind of it goes through the organization and into your community with your donors, your partners.
I love it. That's amazing. I was taking so many notes as you were talking, one of them being culture is either proactive or reactive. I just love that concept. And a takeaway for me
Yeah.
is how much of leadership is about accepting and taking advantage of certain risks that are inherent in the role. You can't play it safe all the time and expect these big breakthroughs. And you've proven that time and time again. And that's the entrepreneurial spirit, that willingness to take some risks and venture into uncharted territory and bring people along for the adventure. Right.
Yeah, I mean during the early part of the pandemic, just remember how scary it was for everyone.
Sure.
We didn't know how long it was going to happen. We didn't know how bad it was going to get. But I remember coaching a lot of CEOs, with webinars around response, right? And I remember just being clear about a couple things. One was you can be anything, but you can't be everything. So you're gonna have to be very selective around what you can do, just given the limitations and the capacity that we have. And then the other was um, you can be you can choose where you're going to be on this response, but you can't be on the sidelines. If you're a nonprofit and you choose to be on the sideline during this global pandemic, you may not make it through this. I remember for us, it was like, we're not going to be able to do all the things that we normally do, but let's get food into the community where there's insecurity. Let's get mental health resources to families and young people, and let's make sure that within reason and safety measures that we're able to serve kids academically so that they don't fall behind. And so like it was a fraction of what we were normally doing, but it required us to get off our butt, put together a plan and take some risk.
Right.
But being on the sideline wasn't an option for us. And so it's those types of decisions that I think end up setting the culture. The other thing is that I'm a part of a Boys and Girls Club. We're one of the most recognized brands in the world. We're one of the most respected nonprofits. We have this large scale nationally. And so there's a benefit to that, right? We've been around for as long as we have. Our Boys and Girls Club is over 85 years old. There's few organizations that have that level
Right.
of impact and longevity. But I think of us as a 85-year-old startup. So like the
Good.
challenge of being an organization that's been around for as long as we have is that you think, well, this is what it's always been like. Very it's difficult to change things that have been around for a long time.
Sure.
I think the disruption I brought 20 years ago has kept our muscle moving around change management. But I think of us as like an 85-year-old startup. I get the benefit of the reputation, the history, the legacy of our brand. But
Yep.
everything we're doing today is through the lens of what if I just today started this initiative? What would it look like? And oftentimes it would look different from what they built 85 years ago. So it's
Yeah.
kind of
Perfect.
balancing those two.
Well, this master class in leadership that you're teaching all of us right now is amazing, and you stepped right into, I think, the main topic of our conversation about being future ready.
Yeah.
So let me intro this because with each of our leader interviews, we focus on a particular theme of nonprofit leadership. And today's discussion is about being future ready as an organization and being sort of a futurist CEO.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to dive into what it means to be future ready and how nonprofit leaders can be more proactive, connecting deeper to that vision or developing the vision, creating strategic plans, culture, infrastructure, all of those things that have a little bit of a different lens when you are a futurist or when you are future ready. So, before we kind of get to the importance of it all, can we back up and maybe you can help me understand what it really means to be
Yeah.
future ready?
So I'll start with kind of the futurist mentality, right? And so
Okay.
I'm a futurist, and what that means is I don't have a crystal ball. I don't. AI is great, but it's not going to tell me everything. And so there's three kind of phases to being a futurist, right?
Okay.
The first phase is really studying and understanding where we are. So, what are the facts? What are the things that we know to be true, right?
Great.
So, there's trends, there's data, um, there's observations, there's experience. So, really studying, like, all right, what's happening right now? And then, if I were to look at maybe the last few years, is this trending in a certain direction? So, like in your world of philanthropy, right? We see change happening pretty consistently in the way that people give to causes, whether that's the process that they may follow or the amount of giving that we that we see. But you can look at it and say, all right, it's this is what's happening every year. So you can, in theory, do the next phase, which is all right. I'm taking what I know, my experience, the analysis of what I know to be true, the facts, the data, the experience. And phase two is let me start forecasting where this is likely to go. And so you could then start to say, all right, and let's say the examples, philanthropy. We can see that there's certain levels or certain type of donors that are getting more active in certain areas and some that are getting less active
Okay.
because of aging groups or it used to be that philanthropy was like it was like tithing, right? So like they give a certain percent and they give it to church and it's a couple
Very
organizations, but
predictable, right? Yeah.
it and think about it, like there's so many more causes today than there were 50 years ago. So it's now there's like you have to make a decision. Do I give to this or do I give to that? I
Right.
think the expectation of philanthropists of what they're supporting is different. So like they used to be like, well, I'm giving the money to this organization because if I don't give them a check, they might shut their doors. And
Yeah.
now
Well, I love the organization's mission as opposed
and
to,
now it's like, what are you going to do with the money?
right,
What's the return on that investment?
right,
They may not likely give a big gift to an organization that isn't running well or isn't sustainable. They may give more money to organizations that are on a growth trajectory. And so
right,
what we
right.
can do is look at the trends, the data, and ask ourselves, where is this going? Right. And
Yep.
we're not
Perfect.
predicting the future, but we're anticipating. And if you really kind of we can do this for a lot of different things. Where is staffing going? Right. So like the cost of staffing is increasing at a faster pace than it did several years ago.
Okay.
So I can choose to just every year when I do my budget, kind of relearn that lesson that oh, it's going to cost more to do this next year, or
Right.
I can think about it and say, all right, where is this trend going? Recruiting of staff has become a lot more of a challenge, for several different reasons. So if I can tackle an issue, look at the data, and understand where it's going, that's
Yeah.
phase two is
Okay.
forecasting. Phase
Good.
three is okay, if this is where it's going, whatever that trend is, what do I need to do to prepare myself for the future, right?
Okay.
And so if that means I'm going to change my strategy for fundraising so that I can align to where the trends are going,
Mm.
um, or if I need to change my recruitment strategy and the way that I recruit talent, and so I can phase three is you implementing, developing plans and implementing plans that are going to get you future ready. And so the way that I look at being a futurist is just understanding what's behind us and what's in the present, but really committing myself to forecasting and then thinking about what does my org chart look like over the next few years, right? And
Got it.
if I
Yeah.
don't have a specific skill set or if I don't have a specific person on my staff that will help us in that area, I now know that's the next hire or that's the next
Perfect.
skill set. And so as a CEO, I'm a growth mindset CEO. I'm constantly taking advantage of courses and going back to I have an MBA, but that only got me to understand the business operations of an organization. So, I'm constantly kind of going back and developing, new skills and, that. So being a future CEO is just really embracing that you do have control over what's in front of you. Things are going to happen, but you control what you can do to prepare yourself for those, likely scenarios, right? And so then as I apply that futurist mentality into the organization,
Yeah.
it's, are we future ready?
Oh
Is
my
our
God.
boardroom
Got it.
future
Yeah.
ready? Right? Are we having is the way that we're running a board meeting today the way that we should be running a board meeting? Right? And we're literally going through that right now with my board, where I kind of came to them recently and was like, I think these board meetings are no longer working for us the way that they're structured, right? The way that I'm getting information to you, the dialogue that we're having is not the right pace for where we're going as an organization, right? But a lot of these things become muscle memory, right? Like it's just, the way that we've always done it, right? We send the board packet, we have an agenda, etc. So is your boardroom future ready? Do you have the right people on your board to get stuff done in the future? Is my staff future ready? Are there skills, are there resources that my team's going to need in order to meet the needs of our community? Are the kids that we're serving future ready? Are we preparing them for the jobs and the careers that are waiting for them? There's a study that came out. Futurists believe that of the kids that are in school right now, kinder through 12th grade, right? So they're in school today. 65% of those kids are going to go into a job that doesn't exist yet. So like, how do we prepare kids for
Wow.
jobs that haven't been invented yet?
Yeah.
Well, we have to think about what are the skills that these young people will need: critical thinking, problem solving, communication skills. So I'm not preparing them for the specific job because I don't know what those jobs will be,
Right.
but I'm
Right.
preparing them for them to be global citizens, for them to be well rounded, for them to have the skill set, for them to develop the adaptability that they're going to need. So, the AQ, how adaptable are they to change? And so resilience and grit. So that's how we embrace this futurist mentality. It's, and if you ask the average person that just hasn't thought about it or framed it up this way, if I show you a graph and I show you this is where things are going, what would you say is happening next? The average person can say, well, if this is the trajectory, this is what's likely to happen next. So it's not, I'm not super smart. It's just that I do these simple things really, really well.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because it seems like you've taken this approach um, with almost every aspect of the organization. You mentioned the board, you mentioned staff, you mentioned the kids. Are the your clients going to be, or are they future ready? And as you were talking, I started thinking about my son and thinking like, okay, write these notes because I need to make sure that he's on this right path, right? But it's in everything that you do as a leader, right? It's not limited to your program.
Yeah.
It's it's hiring practices. It's probably budgeting, as you mentioned. It's the board meetings, the board members of the future. Like, what else am I missing that you've been thinking about?
I mean, it's everything, right? And I'll say this: I would not be able to behave this way, to think this way, and to bring this kind of energy to the club if I didn't have the support staff that keeps me out of the weeds, right? So like, I've always been a dreamer. I've always been
Okay,
a curious
good.
person. I've always been someone that challenges the status quo. That's my trajectory. That's my entire, kind of life has been that person. Asking how things work and why. And so I wouldn't be able to be in that mindset if I was stuck in the kind of the weeds of stuff. So it's because I have an incredible support team. We've developed this really good culture that I'm able to look kind of ahead, right? That doesn't mean that I don't get involved into the organization. I have KPIs and I have systems in place. But the majority of my focus is big picture and looking ahead. And because I'm looking for opportunities, because I'm looking for what's in front of us, I see it. And
Yes.
as I coach other CEOs, that's usually the missing ingredient when when a
Perfect.
nonprofit CEO is in the weeds, it's not by choice. Sometimes it's sometimes like they don't have the support team, the infrastructure, but that's the
Right.
hardest place to be because like you're just trying to make payroll, and
Right.
like some of these other things, like it's a luxury. But I think once you're able to get there, it changes everything. So the answer is it's in everything that we look at. Systems work until they stop working. So it's trying to anticipate, what that looks like. I do a lot of stress testing in our organization of like, all right, this works, but at what point will this maybe fail us, right? And like, your payroll system is only designed, typically until you get to a certain head count, right? Um, I used to have a staff meeting, and everyone can fit in the board in the conference room. Um, we've built a pretty large team. We don't fit in the conference room, and if I had everyone, fit in there, that type of a meeting doesn't work if everyone is just going around the table and all
Right.
that.
Of
So
course.
we've now had to restructure the way that we communicate, the way that we engage, and then we do bring everyone together strategically. But like it's those types of things of like, all right, what do we need to do differently in order for this to kind of work for us?
So awesome. That's really good. You kind of explained how you became a futurist. You always had the sort of DNA characteristics, I guess, but it also was that you had a team that allowed you to do that. You maybe got to a point where you weren't just putting out fires nonstop. So there's so many things that I imagine can get in the way of a good leader being able to focus on the future, being able to anticipate, being more capable of being future ready. And I feel for those leaders, right? Because they desperately want to get to that point, but maybe um, don't feel like they can give proper attention to it.
Yeah.
Any advice that you would sort of give to them as they work so hard to extract themselves from the weeds?
Yeah, I mean, I think about my first couple of years as a CEO. Like I didn't have the infrastructure either, and part of it was like, let me just use what I have, right? And so I did have a few people that were, they weren't executives, right? But I treated them like executives, and they eventually became executives. And so part of it is like you have to start where you're at, and I think it could be overwhelming for someone that's like where they're at. They may look at some a bigger organization or strong organization. They're like, well, how do I even get there? It's just one step at a time. So, I'm a big believer that there's like phases and cycles to these things. So like right now I'm in the process of thinking what's our next phase as an organization? What does it look like? And
Hmm.
so I think just being okay with like wherever you are is where you are, and it's just that first kind of step. So, what can you do with what you have available, whether that's leveraging your board, leveraging a peer system. So, because I've benefited so much from mentorship and from learning from others, I spend a lot of my time coaching, mentoring other CEOs and just giving insight. I think that has become a more common trend. There's a lot more peer groups that are getting together, not just to network and gripe, but really just like, hey, what are you working on? How can I help?
Right.
And I just like I've seen that grow exponentially. I mean, and I'm a part of different groups as well. And but I think just surrounding yourself with a good support system. The worst thing that you can feel as a human being is alone. And
Yeah.
so the CEO position can be a very lonely job. And I'm not complaining in any way, but you have a board, but that board isn't there to coddle you or, kind of they're there to support the organization, right? And you have a staff, and your job isn't to go to staff and have them kind of coddle. So the benefit of a peer group is significant, right? Being able to go to peers and talk to them about what you're facing,
Right.
is huge. I believe that the worst feeling a person can ever feel is feeling alone. it's isolating. It puts you in a depressive state. Once you know, like, oh, I'm not the only one. I'm there's other people that are facing this stuff too, or just being able to just talk to someone. So that's my
Ideate.
yeah,
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 yeah, exactly. They've probably been there before, and so they can maybe help you through, um, guiding you through something that you've never been through before, and then you have that muscle to do it yourself in the
yeah,
future. You say it's important to be proactive. We talked about you can be proactive, you can be reactive. You say it's important to be proactive. What do you mean?
yeah.
How do you define proactivity, I guess?
Yeah, so I'll give you kind of like a real world type scenario, but like, I'm in the safety business, right? Like I need to keep kids safe every day
Jeez.
at every
Yeah.
hour. Um, if I see the same safety issue come up the second time, the third time, and every time I'm just reacting to it and I'm not doing anything different, I'm just reacting to it, then that's a problem. But
Yeah.
if I see it happen one time and I go, how do I make sure that this never happens again? um uh that's you then you develop a plan, and that's you being proactive. So if someone slips and falls because you just mopped the floor and you don't think, well, why is it that that happened? Well, we didn't put a sign up, or maybe we didn't do it properly. And so just looking for those preventative measures, and again trying to be thoughtful of like what could happen. And so again, being proactive is you trying to forecast where things could be, and then developing some intentional action that'll either prevent it or strengthen kind of that out. So like we do a lot of special events, right?
Yeah.
And years ago, I started this habit where we would do a debrief like the a few days after that special event, and we would bring in everyone that was kind of involved, and even if it was a successful event, we would drill down. What did we do specifically that led to the success of either sponsorship or whatever? What are the things that we could do differently that will improve it? And it's not a negative thing. It's not like we have to talk about like whose fault it was or anything like that. But like we consistently are asking ourselves, how do we make this better, right? And so that's being proactive, right? Looking at these trends. When we started to see challenges with recruitment of staff, we started to ask what are the things that might motivate someone. And the easy thing is like, well, a staff bonus or a sign-on bonus or
It's
something like that.
money.
But
It's
like,
money.
it's like we also started coming up with like, what about we have a staff scholarship program, right? So we have our staff that they're able to apply for a scholarship if they're in college or even if they have student debt. And so like we just weren't promoting that well enough. Like that became a kind of a leading kind of factor as we were recruiting, and just what the culture is and things like that. So just being thoughtful and just asking yourself those uncomfortable questions of like,
Yeah.
you know how can we do this better, or how can we prevent this from happening again? And so I think it's the culture of being able to, in a safe environment, to talk about those things. And I got to tell you, like, I'm driving less of those discussions now because the culture that we've developed is creating that. So in those
Good.
first few years, I was really pulling everything, and that was probably the toughest, those tougher years. That now it's like they'll staff will come to me like, hey, here's a plan of how we think we could do this better. And so I think that's kind of in a nutshell how I look at it. But I think the commitment to excellence is what is driving these
Yeah.
things, because it's not you remove ego, you remove like, we just did this event, it took 11 months, like, are we really going to talk about next year? Like, yes we are, and this is why. So I think that's the commitment to that process.
That's awesome. We're winding down our interview, and there are a couple of things I wanted to cover before we conclude. The first is sort of what's most important if someone's wanting to be a futurist leader, and the second is kind of your advice to leaders out there who want to be better, want to
Yeah,
want to excel. So let's start with the most important thing in your mind, and it's okay to say there isn't one important thing, but like what's important to become a futurist leader? Is it the vision? Is it planning, culture, infrastructure, or something else?
I would say, like it kind of similar to what I said a little while ago. Like the reason I'm able to look at the future is because I have the bandwidth for it, right?
Yeah,
Like
good.
I've made the decision that it's important, and so I'm no longer in the weeds of things, and so I would say it's. I know it sounds counterproductive, but like one thing that I give advice consistently to CEOs is how much time are you spending out of the weeds? Just like, even if it's like Friday afternoon, don't book any meetings and kind of clear your head. So the biggest reason that I'm able to is because I'm able to clear kind of space and for me to think about opportunities and being proactive in the future. And so that's kind of that balance, right? And so, one of the kind of the easiest pieces of advice that I give, especially startup kind of CEOs or new CEOs, is it's so easy to just get wrapped up in the grind that you're working 60, plus hours a week. And the reality is, like, I have weeks like that as well, but like you can't keep that pace and not burn out, right? So,
Right.
there's a few CEOs that it's like I kind of dig into, like, what are the things that you do, or what are the places that you go to that just kind of bring you a sense of peace and kind of calm. And so for some people it's going to the beach, going to the gym, taking a run, going skiing. I have a CEO that I coach, and he's in a band, and when I talk to them about this, I'm like, well, when's the last time that you did that? Like, almost consistently, like, oh, it's been a while, right? Like, I haven't done that in a while. And so just being thoughtful of, like, do these things, because especially in our role, we're carrying kind of a high level of stress and anxiety around,
Yeah.
the responsibilities we have, that being able to clear your head is the piece. And so my dad, was did manual labor his entire life, right? And he worked with his hands, and so he would physically be tired, right? And when he got home, and as he got older, he would his body, kind of wore down, right? And my role is to use my brain, right? Like, it's my ability to be an advisor, to think strategically. So if I don't have the balance to use my brain, meaning if I just go from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, and this happened during the pandemic, I was like, I physically can make it to more meetings because of tools like this, right? With
Right.
Zoom. But like, I'm a strategic thinker, so like I would literally be in a meeting and be spinning wheels, and then the meeting would end, I'd go to the next meeting, but my mind was still going on the last kind of topic, so I wasn't really present in that meeting. So I learned,
Good.
like,
Yeah.
I really got to space this stuff out. And so the I guess the advice would be, if this is a priority, treat it like a priority, schedule it out, clear out some time for this. If you're just always in the weeds, you're always going to be tactical. You're never going to get in front of this stuff. And I know it's easier said than done, but it literally, like, you control your calendar. So schedule that time, and it's amazing, I think, what it does for you when you have that kind of happen.
Yeah. Such good advice. Well, I think that's just such a perfect place to end, knowing that you were able to offer such good advice to CEOs and other nonprofit leaders across the full spectrum of sort of leadership tenure, wherever they are in their journey, those that are new all the way to those that are the most experienced running organizations, small and large. So thank you for sharing your expertise and wisdom with us today. There's so much for our audience to unpack. And I have no doubt that it will really positively impact so many leaders today and in the future. Have the opportunity to listen and absorb this podcast. It does bring us to the end of our session today, and we thank you for joining us. Thank you, Robert, for being with us today. But please subscribe to this podcast, please also find and subscribe to the Mastering Fundraising podcast as well. Both focus on these conversations with the most accomplished nonprofit leaders in the sector and the learning that comes from their experience and their expertise. So until next time, we wish you all the best and encourage you all to do what you can for the world by leading for good. So thank you all, and see you very soon.
Thank you for joining us for this most recent episode of Lead for Good. Our passion is helping nonprofit leaders reach their full potential as leaders, and we sincerely hope this episode has been edifying for you. Please subscribe to this podcast to not miss any of our Lead for Good conversations. We welcome your feedback, suggestions, and comments via email at hello@fulcrumleader.com. Lead for Good is a production of Fulcrum Nonprofit Leadership. Please visit us on the web at www.fulcrumleader.com. Until next time, we wish you all the best and encourage you to always lead for good.